Hello everyone, this is Christy with myscrapbookevolution.com, and in this video we are going to be making an art journal page using a shoe. I created this project as a participant in the Stencilfied journal project. It's hosted by Tina Walker. She's a columnist for the Stencil Girl blog. I am not affiliated with Stencil Girl. I'm just doing this project for fun. I'm not compensated to do it. If you're looking for prompts 1 through 12, you can find them on my website or on this YouTube channel. And of course, as I mentioned, we are stenciling with a shoe today. That's today's prompt. You're supposed to stencil the bottom of your shoe and step on the page. Stamping or using a shoe in my art journal just wasn't something I'd ever intended to do. I chose a really old grubby pair of shoes. I washed them off as best I could because I didn't want to be gross. And then I decided to use this stencil. It's the Circular Patterns for Play. Some of the pieces are kind of like a mask, and I was hoping to get a nice design. I did get nice crisp texture from the shoe treads, but the stencil design was not showing up well for me. I tried a couple of different patterns from the stencil, and I still wasn't completely satisfied. I'm using the gesso. It's pretty thick bodied, so I was hoping it would really kind of stick and show up, but what ended up happening was that the tread design kind of took over and sort of just wiped out that stencil design that I had put on there. So what I decided to do was leave the stencil between the shoe and the page and stamp it in there. Of course, I'm not completely following the prompt. I'm just kind of pressing my shoe on like a stamp. And this way I did get both the tread design and the actual design from the stencil. So once it dried, I decided to add a little bit of color to it, and I'm just pulling up color from the original background image that was in there. This is once again my upcycled art catalog from some local classes. And the original picture on the bottom, you can see a tiny bit peeking out. It had a little bit of blue and green, black, and red. Now the nice thing about the tread design with the stencil is that once it dried, it was really thick. So I could scrape across some of the new colors of paint and get some really nice, interesting designs. You kind of see that white from the tread portion peeking through the other parts of the paint. So I would kind of apply the paint on and then scrape it back off with the palette knife to get these textured layers. Now I'm adding in just a little bit of ink. I really have been loving ink lately. I love watching as it moves across the page. I love the texture it adds and the little bit of shine. Now, of course, if you want to work with multiple colors, you have to decide if you want the colors to mix or if you need to wait in between layers and allow it to dry. One of the things that I've started doing lately when I draw portraits is to look for part of a face inside the design. Kind of like when you're a little kid and you're looking for shapes in the clouds. And on this particular page, I saw a lady with a hat covering part of her face. So that's what I'm drawing in. I'm using a gel ink pen. And on this side, I decided that the ink formed part of a jawline. Now, initially, I felt like this was going to be another lady. I usually don't draw gentlemen. But in this case, with that really square jawline, it ended up that a male figure was the better decision. I'm also using my Posca paint pens. These are one of my favorite tools. They have a very fine tip, which makes them easy to draw with. And you're seeing as I'm outlining her face that it's almost like it starts to pull up out of the background. With the ink patterns, it was almost as though she was peeking out from a window. And I've decided that he needs a crown. You know, I'm on that kick right now. So I'm using a portion of the stencil. You'll see the design a little better as I sort of enhance it a little bit with the details from the Posca paint pen and the gel pen. But remember, with a stencil, you don't have to use the entire thing. So this ends up just being a very simplistic crown around his head. It's kind of hard to see, but I have an idea of where his head is positioned so that I know which portions of the stencil to use. I'm using a little bit of acrylic paint to make that stencil design. I wanted to give a little more detail to her hat to make it just seem a little more elegant. So I experimented with the idea of what I might use on the hat itself. I ended up using another portion of that same stencil that I used for the crown to create a band. The circular design fit into the hat nicely, and because it has triangles, it sort of carries in a similar repeating pattern onto the opposite page, gives it a little more uniformity, even though those triangles are slightly different. You can kind of see that the crown and the hat have the design there, but it's not very crisp or clear as to what that design is. So I came back in with the black Posca paint pen and just added a little more detail to both sides of the drawing. I decided to call this page The Prince and the Lady. I find it kind of interesting also that I can sort of see the shape of a shoe on his side, on his face, even though I did not use the full shoe to stamp with. It just sort of ended up being that way. I will say that if you decide to use this project, definitely use older shoes. Immediately after stamping, I washed my shoes off, but there was still some paint that just kind of stained or got stuck in portions of my shoe. I have considered that I really like the texture the tread from the shoe gives, but it can also be kind of gross to work with old shoes. So if this is something that you want to do, you may want to consider going to a dollar store and picking up a cheap pair of children's or baby shoes, something that has interesting tread, but something that you're probably not going to wear out a lot, and you can then use them as stamps on your art journal pages. And here is the completed project. You can see it in more detail and get the supply list at myscrapbookevolution.com. And now it's your turn to play along with the prompt. Find a shoe, make sure it's a clean one, possibly get a brand new one, and stencil with it and put it in your art journal page. If you complete a project, we would love to see it. Share a link in the comments for this video or in the comments on the My Scrapbook Evolution blog.